what do you think are the top areas that we should be paying attention to for assessment?
First of all is, I know it's not accessible to everybody, but the gold standard for body composition is a DEXA scan. So I'm super lucky and fortunate to now have access to that. And I'm using that to assess clients at Loom Women in Health Clinic. And one of the interesting things for me, I'll explain what the DEXA scan does, but what I found really interesting is I come from a generation of you have to be skinny and invisible sideways and whatever. And so, and also always focusing on this number on the scale, which as a person, as a woman and a young woman, of course I put value into what I was seeing there, right? So, but it's just, it's not telling you enough. So then you get your DEXA scan, you've got a body composition, and the three numbers that it does give you quite a few metrics, which is great. But the three numbers that we're mostly concerned about at Loom and that I think are really important to look at because we have the power to move the needle on them. One is relative skeletal mass index, or it's also called appendicular. So it's either ALMI or RSMI. Also helps to give the overall bone mineral density. So what we're doing over at Loom is we're not doing the diagnostic BMD, but it's giving us an idea of like, should that person need a diagnostic?
Right. And you're not doing spot specific, like you're not doing hip,
total body,
spine. You're giving those total body numbers, which is great.
And so given a person's height, that total body bone mineral density will be above or below or at average, something like that?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So it gives like a T
so
score.
It's a ballpark.
Exactly. Yeah. And it has normative data, little graph. Actually, the printout that you get is it's quite nice and it's easy to read. So it's nice even for the clients to look at even if they don't have a science background.
I love this, and I don't want to interrupt, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand that where you started this conversation, which I think is so valuable for all women to understand, as you said, I have a generational influence on that number on the scale. And that to me, I've struggled with this for a long time, as a female athlete as well. And we've been talking to many female Olympians. We had beach volleyball players on here where the aesthetic of what they look like on top of what they're doing competitively, it's so huge, right? And with social media, it's becoming more huge. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that number on the scale means more than it should. And then to tie in the bone density, you could have a woman who has very good bone density, who looks the same. So say we had two women that, weighed around 130 pounds, and we could have one female that looked a certain way and had really terrible bone mineral density. Her weight on the scale would be less versus a very healthy bone mineral density on the scale on our other female. And we could say that, the scale number would be higher, but it would be because her bone density is great. And this is why that number is so crucial, that you understand what is the scale made up of. And we haven't even hit lean body mass yet. So continue. But I think it's really interesting.
That's exactly the point for sure. And if I had a dream for every woman who had that sort of, cognitive state, just to be able to have a body composition via the DEXA scan, because it's giving you some concrete numbers. So the bone mineral density gives us the overall picture. I mentioned the RSMI, and then we're also looking at visceral adipose tissue. So the DEXA does give you an overall body fat percentage, which can be pretty jarring. For whatever reason, we walk around with numbers in our head that we think we should be or we shouldn't be. And also, depending on your ethnicity as well, that's going to change of what's, one person might be really high, but they're super healthy. And so I don't love that number as a tool for health, like as an indicator for health. But the visceral adipose tissue, we know the fat in and around our organs has risks associated with it, with metabolic conditions or cardiovascular conditions. So that's the health risk there. So it gives us that number. And it's been really neat to see women. On one hand, people come in and I feel almost sad because they're like, "Oh, I'm nervous," and I'm like, "What? Like, there's nothing to be nervous about. We're just going to be looking at numbers, and this is exciting because now you get to know what's happening in here. And then similar to how I felt when I had my first DEXA scan, they see these numbers and they're like, oh, okay, great. Or, even if it's not something where they maybe think they should be or want to be, it becomes a conversation. Well, how do I change that? And so it's much more positive. Like, what can I do to, and of course, then it's all about exercise and resistance training. And so that's a really fun conversation to have.
And that first metric you mentioned, is that lean body mass? Is that another way of describing that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.